say that the first step of learning how to work in culturally diverse environments is to become self-aware, okay, to be aware of your own culture. Talking about culture, there are three kind of images I like to use to illustrate what culture is. The first one is the iceberg. I'm sure you've all seen it, and you all use it to illustrate that you've got the visible part of the culture, any culture, and that is the tip of the iceberg, the most visible things that you will almost spot immediately when you move from one culture to another. So these are things like food, dress, music, visual art, how people express themselves externally. And then you've got under the water, the invisible bit, which is the significantly larger part of the iceberg, in our case the culture, where you've got the unspoken rules, and here are they listed: rules of conduct, rules of speech, facial expressions, hand gestures, etc. And then you've got the unconscious rules that are applied almost subconsciously. Things and behaviour that you adopt and you do without even thinking about them. Okay? And that, if you're new to a culture, is really difficult to understand. Sometimes it's difficult to understand for your own culture and to express what that is and why we do things in that way, if you've not stopped and thought about it. And often people don't, because when you're in your own culture, you're not completely aware that you're behaving or reacting in a specific way. So the second image is that of spectacles. So think of your culture as the special spectacle, invisible glasses that you wear that have a tint, okay? They're coloured. And we're all looking at the same world or the same thing, but we see it slightly differently. That tint is influenced by our culture, the way that we've been brought up and where we've been brought up. Okay, the values of that place, the traditions, the way things are done in that particular place. So the third is that the image of the fish out of water. Okay, much like the fish out of water, we don't really recognise what the properties of our culture, what our culture is, until we're taken out of it and we're faced with a cultural difference. Think of the times when you've kind of gone abroad, I suppose, not having prepared that much, not knowing that much about the place, and ended up there and start thinking, well, that's all very weird. I'm feeling a bit weird. And this is because it's different. It just is different. The way people behave, again, the visible things are different, the food is different, the climate is different, the buildings look different in some cases. And also the unspoken rules and the subconscious rules are also different, even though you immediately don't realise it. So how do we become culturally aware then? So where do we start? The first step is becoming self-aware, knowing more about yourself and your own culture. And then realising that eventually you'll start doing that. We're not all the same. And accepting that similarities and differences are both important. And also accepting that there are multiple ways to do things. The way that we in this country or in this culture, or you and your cultures have chosen to behave in a particular way doesn't make it the best way. All it says is, it's fine. It depends on the contingency, the cultural contingency of what is appropriate. Okay, so what is appropriate in one context will depend on that context. Okay? Okay, so just introducing you to a model. This is by a cultural theorist called Milton Bennett, and it's widely known as the Bennett's model of cultural awareness. So these are the stages that you go through to develop cultural awareness. You start with complete denial of difference. You know, what's this? Doesn't exist. My way is the only way. You don't accept anything. Then you go through the second stage, the defense against the difference. I know there is another way, but my way is always better. Then minimization of difference. They're all pretty much like us. You know, what is it? Why is it important to learn about this? We are all behaving the same way. Going through the acceptance of difference, which is, it will be boring if everybody's the same. So I'm accepting now that there are differences. Differences exist, yeah? Going through then adaptation to difference, acknowledging that on occasion it is appropriate to change your approach in order to achieve something if you're working in a different culture. And then integration of difference, when you're comfortably moving between cultures, okay? And you can usually look at it from different perspectives and see and understand the difference. So I think this is kind of mostly the boring theoretical part. Will be over soon. So how do we manage cultural diversity? We all work and live in countries which are culturally diverse now, with the movement of people in Europe. First of all, we need to recognize it and don't fear it. And you would be surprised how many people are scared they'll do something wrong, they'll say something wrong, they'll offend students or colleagues who are culturally diverse from them. You need to admit that you don't know something. If you don't know anything about a particular culture, you need to show curiosity and admit that you don't know. But then most importantly, you should not make assumptions and you should suspend any judgment. Going back to the example at the beginning, you shouldn't think, oh, you know, that student is stupid for not wanting to use our professional GP service, our wonderful NHS. You shouldn't immediately think, you know, there's something wrong with that student. What's wrong with that student? Suspend judgment. Try and understand what is the difference, what is it that you don't see, the invisible bit of the iceberg, to help and work with the student. Show empathy. Again, systematically check whether you've made any assumptions and step back from assumptions. Working with culturally diverse people is about being comfortable with ambiguity, because going back to the example with the tinted glasses, always remember that no matter how clear-cut the situation is, there might be multiple readings of it, yeah? Because I have pink glasses and it's got yellow, okay? So when I say pink, it says yellow. It's a very basic example. I do have that example from my home life, actually, because my husband doesn't see colours in the same way. And he says, where's my green bag? I say, what green bag? He says, well, you know that green bag I always use for work. And I look at him and I say, it's grey. It's kind of the same situation, okay? So becoming comfortable with ambiguity. So now when he says, where's my green jumper? I know, actually it's the grey one, etc. And then celebrating diversity, really feeling so comfortable with it and knowing that you can function and operate fluidly across cultural boundaries. If you get to that stage, you're really competent intercultural operator. Andrew is going to run a very interesting exercise with you, which is the beginning of becoming more self-aware. We will group you in differently. What do you want them to do?
I think we want people with similar cultures and countries together.
Okay.
I think that would be quite interesting.
So
obviously we have quite a few from France, and they can get together. Quite a few from Germany and Spain. And if you think that you've got similarity, it doesn't have to be identical, but if you've got similarity.